Seems like it was a lifetime ago now, but in the mid-90s, I went through a real dark night of the soul that left me brokenhearted and literally bankrupt. And about the only thing I had left to my name at that time was a bunch of frequent flyer points. And my old friend and former board chairman, the now late Dr. David Belcher, gave me some really good advice. He said simply, go to Paris. Now, Paris is not necessarily a great place to be when you're broke. But I found a really cheap hotel in a pretty sketchy neighborhood, and armed with a week-long subway pass and a Michelin tour guide book, I set out to see Paris. La Tour Eiffel, Notre Dame, Montmartre, and Palais Versailles. What began to become evident to me was the fact that even the ordinary, the purely functional aspects of a city, its bridges, the tomb of Napoleon, just to look up the Champs-Élysées and see the Arc de Triomphe right in the middle of a busy intersection, just streets. It was as if the French had decreed that anything, a school, a government building, a business district, everything had to be the most amazing, the most beautiful, the most carefully designed and painstakingly thought out use of space and light and building materials imaginable. David suggested that I go to Paris to begin to heal, to let my heart and my soul be restored by beauty. And it was really good advice. For the first time in my life now, I am finding myself in agreement with President Trump on one issue. He recently issued a 7-page executive order decreeing that federal buildings should be beautiful again. There was a time when government buildings were built to be inspiring, but for a couple of generations now, we've been typically getting these glass and steel buildings, sometimes decorated with art that at least for me requires a good deal of interpretation. I have no idea what that red thing is there. I mean, I think if you're looking at art and you have to go up and read the plaque, something is lost in the exchange. Now, most architects and engineers are reacting very negatively to Trump's executive order, but unless I'm missing something, I'm inclined to agree with him. I think that beauty should be public. We have a tendency to want it private. I'm just astonished by the number of gated communities that we have around us in which people want to have these, I don't know what all they could be compensating for, but these huge edifices locked behind doors and security cameras for their own benefit. But I think most people in Paris live in really small apartments because being out and looking at Paris itself is so beautiful. Life is often unspeakably hard. There are illnesses, there are heartbreaks, there are emotional and there are financial disasters. There are wars, there are plagues, there are myriad forms of human engineered evil. Friedrich Nietzsche said, "We have art so that we do not die from reality." Leander Keck, former Vanderbilt Divinity School professor, said that because the world is so hard, because the world is so full of suffering, that we should expose ourselves to beauty in order to astonish our souls. He's the one that came up with that phrase, or at least as far as I know did. Because beauty can both heal and inspire. I heard Professor Keck lecturing in a cathedral in Atlanta about 30 years ago, and the place was full of parish pastors, and he was absolutely demanding that we not fall prey to the modern pressures to dumb down our church services, to fill them with things that are simply cute or trite or trivial, songs and sermons and liturgy that were childish. And yes, sitting there among the marble and stone of an amazing cathedral wasn't hard to feel that astonishment. But what does that say to little churches like ours who cannot possibly afford a building of that grandeur? Obviously, everyone couldn't do what we do, but we have the very good fortune of having a collection of the most amazing musicians that have ever drawn breath. Our musicians infuse our services with a variety of the most creative, inspiring, and challenging, as well as beautiful music. And sometimes I suggest things to Sean because I love the lyrics, and I don't have the skill to know whether the music sucks. So I'm sorry. But I tend to be more the literate type, when it comes to that kind of thing. But of course, we try to write meaningful liturgy here. I do my very best to deliver sermons that are both educational and morally challenging. And this is no exaggeration, many of the people who are among our most faithful listeners online will eventually schedule a trip to Springfield. They want to come and meet me. They want to be a part of a service. And most of the time, they will tell me, the sermon brought me here, but the music was the most memorable part of the experience, and that's what I'm going to take home. And I don't feel the slightest bit of jealousy about this, guys, because frankly, I agree with them. You guys are amazing. I have delivered more than 2,000 sermons in my life. I'm sure most of you can remember almost all of them. But not a single one of them stand out in my memory. Not a one. But I can tell you about a night that some friends and I were laying on the grass in St. Louis listening to James Taylor sing at the Riverside Coliseum. I can tell you about the first time I saw Les Miserables performed on stage in Louisville and heard, "Do you hear the songs of angry men?" I can tell you about a night at the Galois when Jackson Browne stood on a stage all by himself with about 24 guitars, and he just played every song that we called out. For hours he stayed and played. Those moments are with me forever. So I'm not talking just about church experiences. Several of us are going out tonight to hear our friend Kelly Osbourne sing, and our hearing will recover sometime later this week. But I attend live music events from opera to blues to Irish drinking songs every week. And when I can, I expose myself to great art. Last fall, I was a passenger on a ship that spent just 6 hours in port in New York City. And my friend, one of our very devoted listeners, Dr. William Jimenez, offered to come and pick me up and take me anywhere I wanted to go in New York to spend my little bit of time there. And I asked if we could go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And William and I had the most wonderful visit. We showed one another our favorite pieces in that amazing collection. But whenever I'm in New York, even if it's just a layover at the airport that lasts for 3 or 4 hours, I'll jump in a cab and go to the Met and sit on this bench in front of this 19th century painting of St. Joan of Arc by Jules Bastien-Lepage. He depicts the teenage martyr at that moment in her parents' garden when she first hears the voices commissioning her to save France from British occupation. Now, clinically, you could say that Joan was mad, probably schizophrenic, but even the hardest of hearts could not say that she was just crazy or that she was simply a schizophrenic. It is the look on her face that takes me back to the Met over and over for the last 30 years. Time and time again, I sit and look in that face. It isn't really about the historical person, Joan of Arc, whose story is actually more sad than anything else. It isn't the technique of the artist so much. It is that this painting says something to me about my life. You look at her and you see the awful dread that she is experiencing about what she's being asked to do, and yet the noble resolve that this 16-year-old girl is going to do it. She will be the servant of God, more of France than of God, but she is going to do what she believes she's being asked to do. So I keep a print of this painting over my desk at home where I write, because I want that intensity in what I write. An artist friend of mine has known of my love of this painting for years, and rather prophetically aware of how my career in a denominational church was going, she made this small sculpture for me that is the immolation of St. Joan of Arc, who was historically rewarded for her passion by being burned alive at the stake. Artists can be kind of tough that way, you know, just knowing how art can speak to us at a much deeper level than words alone. I was talking about this sermon with a friend of mine who spent a few years in what he euphemistically calls his time out, which happened to be in a federal prison. He said that towards the end of his sentence, he couldn't wait to get out to go to Kansas City and go to the Nelson Adkins Art Museum. The beginning of healing from such a hard period of deprivation and isolation was to be exposed again to beauty. Can you imagine going from prison to go and sit in front of this huge canvas of Monet's water lilies that is in the Nelson Adkins collection? Or my favorite, which is a very small item, it's this amazingly intricate 18th century ivory miniature sculpture from Italy of the expulsion of the rebel angels from heaven. They're spiraling from heaven down to hell, but it's so detailed. I'm sorry that photograph's not that great, but these tiny, tiny little figures, all carved from a single piece of ivory that surely must have driven the artist completely insane before it was finished. And you see, you don't have to own this. You don't have to put a security camera by your front door. You just have to go visit it. You just go to Kansas City. You go to New York. You go here in Springfield. We have an amazing collection of watercolors right here in Springfield. I asked Sean, though, to do this song from Bruce Coburn that's in our service today, in which Coburn sings about the imperative to listen to your poets. He says, pay attention to the poet. You need him, and you know it. Put him up against the wall, shoot him full of pentothal, shoot him up with lead. You won't call back what's been said. Put him in the ground, but one day you'll look around and there'll be a face you don't know that's voicing thoughts you've heard before. Male, female, slave or free, peaceful or disorderly. Maybe you and he will not agree, but you need him to show you new ways to see. I think of the Lithuanian filmmaker Jonas Mekas, recently deceased. I think he was right when he said that civilizations themselves begin to perish when they start listening to their politicians rather than their poets. That may seem like hyperbole to you, but I would challenge you. Go online and read Donald Trump's latest State of the Union address, and then look up T.S. Eliot's Hollow Men, or the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock, and ask yourself which one of them is telling you the truth. Okay, don't get ahead of me. There was not much of what could be called art or poetry in my rural Kentucky home life. In fact, the principal difference between a cup of yogurt and Glasgow, Kentucky, is that a cup of yogurt has an active living culture. You laugh, but seriously, the zip code where I'm from is EIEIO. But in the summer of 1973, when I was 16 years old, against my parents' wishes, without their permission or their knowledge, I slipped off night after night to go to the movie to watch the newly released film, Jesus Christ Superstar. And it set my mind on fire. I don't know how many times I saw it, dozens at least. It went from the theater to the drive-in, and I was sitting alone at the drive-in night after night watching this movie. The music set my mind free from the magical religious stuff that my church had taught me. It taught me to see the battle between Jesus and an empire. It instilled in me an inspiration that has affected my entire adult life. Nearly 50 years later, I still implore our musicians to take on the Herculean task of presenting that musical here on Easter. And if there is not a cold, hard place where your heart was supposed to be, that music will still thrill you. It inspires you. It teaches you. No one's going to preach that day, but I guarantee you that'll be the best sermon preached in this building this year. I will conclude where I began this morning, quoting Leonard Bernstein. Art never stopped a war, never gave anyone a job. Ask an artist. What do you do for a living? And then so you can do your art. Art cannot change events, but art can change people. Art has changed me. I suspect most of you would say the same. If we will but expose ourselves to art, we can be enriched, ennobled, and encouraged. And when our souls have been astonished, it can change the way we live, it changes the way we act. Men and women, it changes the way we vote because it changes the way we think. So I'm going to implore you today to support our local performing artists in music and in theater and in physical arts. Don't always think of art as something you go out and buy to hang on the walls of your own home. Art is something that you experience. Go to our art museum. Support our local orchestra and opera. Turn off your TV and go out and hear a live music performance. Go back into the poetry section of Barnes & Noble and sit down and just leaf through enough collections until you find one that you cannot live without. And if you need a suggestion, start with Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. Don't let the harshness and the ignorance of this world dull your mind and kill your spirit. You are a community of prophets. And so even if you cannot hear the voices on your own, I am telling you, they are calling you to save the world.
Thank you for watching our videos. We are entirely dependent on the donations of our listeners and members. We hope that you find this content to be important enough to help us to keep offering these videos to the public at no charge by becoming a regular contributor. Please click on the donate button on our website at www.spfccc.org. Thank you for your support of progressive religious programming.